Welcome everyone. Good evening, everyone. We are starting our session, and today's session focuses mainly on academic writing practices, an essential skill for publishing, thesis writing, and research communication. My name is Adit, and I am doing political science integrated. Now I am in fourth year in University of Hyderabad. So today I will be moderating the session, and to talk about the organizers before we begin, I would like to briefly introduce the two initiatives behind this series. That is, Bahujan Scholars, which is a non-profit organization that is registered in the US. It is a network of graduate students, faculty, and professionals outside India. The network's purpose is to support scholars from Bahujan communities, to build networks, provide mentorship, and organize online events on academic and professional development topics. On the other hand, we have our Kashf initiative, which was began through conversations and academic journeys of students from South Asia who realized that many of the foundational skills in the social science and humanities, such as critical reading, thinking methodologically, academic writing, etc., are often assumed rather than explicitly taught. It began with an intent to create a space where students and researchers could learn from each other through their shared experience and learnings and make academic journeys more meaningful and less isolating. So Kashf also recognized that these gaps are often more pronounced for students outside metropolitan centers and those who are from historically marginalized backgrounds. With this mind, Kashf has organized monthly sessions, a range of workshops and training sessions on research methods, literature reviews, academic writing, referencing, and related topics, as well as sessions in regional languages also there too, as an effort to bridge language barriers to make this academic conversation more accessible. So, for more information about the initiatives, you can visit the respective websites that is mentioned here in the chat box. So, introducing the panelists, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today's session, Sonakshi Srivastava. Welcome, madam. She's a senior writing fellow at the Center for Writing and Communication at Ashoka University. Sonakshi studied English literature at the University of Delhi and holds an MPhil in English from Guru Gobind Singh Indraprastha University, where her research examined the biopolitics of ability and debility in contemporary fiction. She also holds a postgraduate diploma in translation and creative writing and a postgraduate certificate in the teaching of English. Alongside her work at Ashoka, she serves as the translation editor at Usawa Literary Review and as an educational arm assistant at Asymptote. Her writing and translations have been supported by fellowships and grants, including the ASLE Translation Grant, Poetry HUS Fellowship, and the Diverse Voices Fellowship. And her work has appeared in publications such as Asymptote, Scroll, The Lavacor, the Alipore Post, and Hakara. With her extensive experience in academic writing, teaching, editing, and translation, we are delighted to have her lead today's session on academic writing practices. So I'm handing over the mic to speaker to start the session. Before handing over, guys, until the Q&A session, we would like everyone to unmute their mute there. Welcome, madam. Mic is yours.
Thank you so much, Adit. It's a pleasure to be back again at Kashf to conduct another session. I'll start straight up. There are a few, so I wanted for this session to be a bit interactive, but of course, not in the sense where I could do a lot of back and forth. So, there are a few questions that I will pose while I'm presenting. I just want you to think about those questions yourself. You do not have to unmute and answer. If you feel like you can put your answers in the chat box, but feel free to just like think and write those responses down. This is all that I ask at this moment. And of course, pay attention to what I'm speaking. And if there are questions, of course, there'll be a whole set that we'll look at just discussing question answers. So feel free to bring those up. And again, this is a very limited overview of academic writing practices. So if there are questions related to stuff that I haven't covered in my presentation, feel free to just ask those as well, and I'll try my best to answer them. So I'll just put my screen on share and I'll just begin. Just a minute. Okay. Vidushi, can you just let me know if my screen is visible?
It's loading, Sonakshi.
Okay.
Yeah.
It says
In fact,
encountered a problem. Just 1 minute. I'll try it once again.
yeah. Mm, It's loading again. It's visible now, so you can take it on slideshow mode. Yeah.
Okay,
Uh,
okay.
Sonakshi, meanwhile, could you also disable the annotations? Yeah.
Just 1 minute. I think I cannot.
As in, like, if you look at the top of your screen, the zoom panel will come up in the drop down.
Mhm.
And if you look at the three dots towards the end and you right click it, there will be an option to disable annotations for others. Or I think it's
It
disabled. You're
says,
good. I think it's
yeah,
disabled.
yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry, sir. Thank you.
Okay, perfect, perfect. Okay, so I'll start. Just 1 minute. Again, there is something. Okay, yeah. So overview of the session. What I'll briefly cover today, it's clarity and academic style, argument and thesis structure, something about analytical voice and originality, and of course, revision as to how we figure out our writing and what we are writing. So these are a few things that I would like to focus on in this session. Okay, in just one word, I want all of you to tell me, not tell me exactly, but maybe you could just write your response in the chat box or write it down as a one word answer right now. How does academic writing feel to you today? So maybe you are just starting out in your academic writing journey. Maybe you are midway in your academic writing journey, or maybe you are towards the end of your academic writing journey. By end, I mean maybe you are ready with your dissertation, you're ready perhaps with an academic paper that you've been writing, whatever it is. So I want you to just think about this question in retrospect and tell me, how does academic writing feel to you today or now? So just take a minute to think about this and write your answer. You don't have to tell me the answer right now. Just write it down. That's all that I ask. We'll come back to this in a bit. Okay. While we're thinking about this, I'll move on to the next slide, which is about clarity and academic style. So, in my own life as a scholar, I have always believed that this is something that I struggle with the most. There have been moments where I have submitted my manuscript for consideration by the editorial board of different journals. And these are journals both national and international. So I'm just not being very specific here, but a very general idea and a very general overview of what has happened to me and continues to happen, in fact, is the feedback that I receive from the reviewers. And I believe at this point, all of us here know how the peer review process works for journals, especially if you're looking at high end journals like Taylor and Francis, or journals with that are affiliated with universities abroad. They have a very, very rigorous peer review style, and sometimes it takes years to get an article published. I remember my first article took almost a year and a half to be out in the world. And the feedback that I received, although very exhaustive, but the feedback that I got from my reviewer one itself was that my writing is too descriptive, which was a shock for me because we always think of academic writing as very dense, as very descriptive. So, what is it that we have to keep in mind when we talk about academic writing practices, and how do we clarify the whole idea of what academic style and what academic writing practice should look like? So, I'll come back to the story again, but just for to get the ball rolling. This is something that all of us should pay attention to. Academic style is often mistaken for density. We end up using all the words available to us in our, like, whatever limited vocabulary we have. We tend to look for the difficult words, and we think that, okay, if I employ these difficult words, perhaps this is how my paper, or this is what would make my paper academic. So, what happens then is that we end up making or writing in a very dense way. Now, density is not equivalent to academic writing. Perhaps it is, but that is bad academic writing. So, density is equivalent to bad academic writing, not academic writing that we are aspiring for. In practice, it rests on a few concrete habits, and the earlier you know them, the better for you. So that you don't have to worry about getting the tone of the academic writing correct. The first thing is avoiding idiomatic or colloquial phrasing. Now, again, rely on phrases, sure, but do not over rely on them. And of course, do not use colloquial phrasing. Whatever it is that you are writing, it has to be very to the point. So do not end up also writing the way you speak. Uh, Presenting an academic paper is also very different from the way you end up writing an academic paper. So these are very two different components. You could perhaps adapt the paper while you are presenting and adopt colloquial phrasing for it. But when you are writing, refrain. Stay away from colloquial phrasing and stay away from idioms. Idioms like since the dawn of civilization, right? So do not use these idioms which are not specific. Precision over vagueness. This is exactly what I'm talking about when I say do not use idioms like since the dawn of civilization. Why? Because since the dawn of civilization, what civilization are we talking about? It is very, very vague, right? So you have to be precise. So instead of writing since the dawn of civilization or several years ago, think and write about a stated period. State the period, date the period. Okay, so you have to be as precise as possible. Do not meander. So, meandering is the word that we all fall into while writing because we feel that academic writing has to be dense. We feel that academic writing has to be, our paper has to be extremely long. And to meet the word count, we end up adding more and more and more to it without being specific. So, this is a pitfall that all of us have to remember while we are writing. Then, avoid adverbs that signal personal attitude, like luckily, remarkably, or surprisingly. And another thing that I want to add here, because this is exactly the feedback that I had received from my reviewer, was that I used a lot of adjectives. So also refrain from adjectives. I would contest that academic writing is not creative writing, because as a creative writer, I feel that academic writing is also a kind of creative writing, really. But knowing that we have to follow the rules, and we're always, always scared of reviewer too, who could just on their whim just cancel our papers and not send it for further revision or publication, stick to the in-house style guide of the publishing journal that you are publishing with. So for that, remember, stay away from adverbs and stay away from adjectives. If you want to write very big, just write large. That's it. So this will also take care of excessive words and also vagueness. What is very big? We don't know. But large, yes, we would understand what large means. So avoid adverbs and adjectives, and especially adverbs that signal personal attitude. These smuggle in a stance the analysis hasn't yet earned, right? So feel free to use these adverbs towards the conclusion once you have proven what it is or what it is that you were trying to like prove, but not very early in your paper, not when you are still making a case for your arguments, when you're still defending it. These could just be like slid in towards the conclusion, but again, this is something that I would still refrain from unless and until I'm writing an opinion based piece. So I would stay away from anything that signals my personal positioning around the piece that I am writing. These could work excellent for short form essays, for blogs, but not for academic writing. And very important, using signposting to move between sections, not just within sentences. Sometimes we get so involved in our writing that we do not pay attention to how we are transitioning between paragraphs themselves. So, for once, we may think that, okay, if we are making a case for non vegetarianism, for example, we'll be talking about non vegetarianism and everything that it might entail. And then in the next paragraph, we have something that talks about the pros of vegetarianism without even signaling that switch. So be very, very attentive to how you switch between paragraphs. Use a connector, use a word, a line, a theme idea, or whatever it is to bridge the gap, to bridge this transition. Do not treat your paragraphs in isolation. Remember, if you have made the transition successfully, you are 90% in. Your job is 90% done. So you have to also pay attention to how you're transitioning between paragraphs. And again, for that, very simple, focus either on a key word from the preceding line, focus on the key idea, or focus on a key theme, or also a work by a scholar. So if you've ended the paragraph with, like, say, scholar Mary Douglas, maybe you can begin the next paragraph by refuting Mary Douglas's claim or further building on that claim. That is a very, very good way to transition and also the easiest way to maintain continuity in your writing. So, again, these are a few things that I would pay attention to, especially when I'm writing and I'm doing the writing the academic way, applicable across academic journals as well as academic writing like thesis, dissertations, whatever it is that you are working on. Now, very briefly, let's look at it for a few minutes. Let's give 5 minutes to this. I want you to read this. And again, you do not have to unmute to tell me the answer. You can just make a note of it and tell me what is working and what is perhaps not working in this simple line. I'll read it out to you. Several years ago, lots of researchers were, quite surprisingly, looking at things like this and it changed a significant number of ideas about the topic in question. So, read this, stay with this line, and tell me what is working and what is not working. Or make a note of it. Just make a note of it for your own self. Do understand that as a statement, as an academic statement, this stands very valid. But you have to tell me what is it within this sentence that is a problem, or there are problems within this sentence. I'll give you 2 minutes to think about this and to make a note. Okay. Now that you have read this, I would move on to the next slide to just give you a hint of what is it that I was actually looking for. So, this is a question about vocabulary. A lot of things in this sentence are extremely vague, even if they sound academic. And what is it? So, for anything, um, if you write like, do not use like. Like is something that we stay away from as a word in our academic writing. In place of like, switch to such as or for instance. If you say something, then again use words like factor or issue. Avoid using etc. or and so on. Again, be specific. You do not have to be vague. For lots of, instead of lots of, because this is colloquial, right? This is the way we speak. We do not write like this. So instead of saying lots of examples, you can say a significant number of examples or a considerable number of examples. Then you have something like get better or worse. Do not write this. Because again, this is a very comparative quality and this is also the way we speak. So instead of writing get better, you could just write improve. And instead of writing get worse, you can just say deteriorate, right? So these are the words that are academically sound, right? These sound academic enough, and also they are specific. They are not vague, like, or something, or lots of, or get better or worse. So if you have to go back to the previous statement, you could see that there are a lot of things within the sentence that you would like to change by using words or by using appropriate words. Okay. So now, if you've written the sentence, that's good enough. But if you want to, you can just look at this word bank that I planned as an exercise, and you can see what are the words that are vague in academic writing and that are considered precise in academic writing. So, results, we write findings. Okay. In place of question, we say challenge. In place of change, it is alter. In case of quote, cite. Evaluate is examine. Found is establish. Show is demonstrate. And predict is forecast. So now, if you go back to this sentence again and use the words from the word bank to replace the words within the sentence, you will arrive at a more appropriate and an academically sound statement. Okay, so whenever you get time, try this and you will see that you will move away from the statement, which is still very vague when you read it. And when you replace it with these words, it will sound more precise. Okay, so do understand that even if a word exists in the English dictionary, uh, they might not qualify enough to be academic. Okay, so show, predict, very, very much valid as standard English words, but these are still sounding vague in your academic writing. So, to have a good writing, to just be a good academic writer, you have to be as precise as possible and use the right kind of words. Okay, so this is just an example. If you want, you can copy these down. Um, I'll move on to the next bit. Now, again, this is something very, very important. You also have to remember that if you are writing for a particular discipline, you have to adopt the vocabulary of that discipline. Okay? It is a good practice and it is also something that is encouraged, because if you do not use the vocabulary of that specific discipline, chances are that your paper or your research might just fall through. Okay? Of course, remember to look up the meanings of those words and just do not use them as is. So, do understand the context of those words, of the vocabulary, but also make it a point to acclimatize yourself to the vocabulary of that particular discipline. That is extremely, extremely important. You may end up using, say, intersectionality in a very different context in, say, something like literature. But if you are a gender studies scholar, you might want to use intersectionality in a very, very particular way. Okay? Same goes for a word like reification, right? So, reification, Marxist theory, could be something carrying a very specific tone, but it could also mean something not entirely different, but the context would differ if you're using this in, say, like Paul science, for example, right? So, do acclimatize yourself to the audience, the discipline that you are writing for, and try to look at definitions and scholars who have worked around that specific vocabulary or term so as to further consolidate your writing. Okay, because this is another step to ensure that your writing is foolproof, that there are no loopholes either in your argument or your vocabulary, right? So, looking at it more from a structural level and not content, I mean, this feeds into the content as well, but also looking at it from a very structural level, ensure that you know what kind of paper or what kind of terms, what kind of vocabulary is employed within that specific discipline. So, know your audience, know your scholars, right? So, all these words, epistemic, intersectionality, extimacy, foreclosure, reification, a priori, posteriori, are all these terms that you want to pay particular attention to and know where these are particularly used. Okay. Now, what to do with these terms? Just use as part of common knowledge within the discipline. Also, if you are writing an interdisciplinary paper, right? And you are borrowing the meaning of that particular word from another discipline. Explain. Explain for clarity, context, why you have chosen this particular term for this particular paper, right? So ensure to provide clarity. Do not just drop it there. And of course, I'm not asking you to write a paragraph long explanation. just a word, just a line, or a scholar's definition would do. Now, something, say, also very specific. You may want to use the word work in a very different context as compared to the word labor, right? So the dictionary will tell you that both these words are synonyms, but you have to look at the specificity, at the context that you are using these words for. Okay, so again, not always a good idea to use synonyms. Okay, you may think that, oh, laugh is such a simple sounding word. Let me use a synonym for laugh, and which sounds dense. Do not use that. Do not. That's a bad writing practice. Because again, going back to what I told you, bad academic writing is dense. As simple as that. So if you feel that your writing is simple, that's not a problem as long as you are making sure that your arguments make sense and that there is a structure in your writing. So do not fall into this habit of looking up the synonyms and choosing the most difficult word because it sounds academically dense. Do not do that. Okay? Because despite it being a synonym, it may hold different weight. It may hold a different kind of meaning. Okay? As, for example, the distinction between work and labor. You may want to use work for a very specific argument, and you may want to use labor for a very specific argument, and actually want to make a distinction between the two as well, instead of using them as synonyms. Okay, so be very particular about these things. Now, another important thing that we have to keep in mind when we come down to the content bit of our writing is the argument and thesis structure. Because sure, you have your notes. How then do you structure your writing with the content? Very simple, and this is my go-to framework. You have your claim, you have your evidence, you provide your reasoning, and then you give an explanation, which is basically so what, right? This is what you have to do, and this is exactly what academic writing is about. In simple words, a thesis statement is this framework compressed into a single sentence. It names what the paper investigates and gestures at how. So basically, you take care of the what and the how through your thesis statement. What is it that you are saying, and how is it that you are going to prove it? Okay, so if you look at this framework, this is very simple and very condensed. You have a claim, you come up with a claim. To prove that claim, you provide evidence. To further solidify that evidence, you provide your reasoning, and that reasoning leads you to so what? What is it that you are trying to prove, or what is it that you've been trying to say? Okay. So now, very briefly, I'll just walk you through a sample. There's nothing wrong in this sample, okay? I want you to look at it and pay attention to how this is structured in terms of A, the style of writing, and B, the content. And you will see that this is what good academic writing practice looks like. And I mean, in a way, there are no difficult words, really. And this is a proper academic piece that I am talking about. Okay, so it's about the sports industry, politics, and the market. And if you look at the introduction, which is just the opening, recent times have seen an increasing commercialization of sports, such that today we have before us a vast industry with sponsors and advertisement agencies taking over. The world of sports has now come to be dominated by one primary objective: profit making. Okay. Now, thesis statement. This paper, in looking at this rapid commodification of sport, will attempt to investigate how, whatever it is, has also now become nothing short of an entertainment program whose main focus is not so much the sport itself, but increased TRPs and selling different products. The first part of the paper will begin by looking at the history of the sport and analyze how this commodification has set in. The paper will then move on to look at how sports, in addition to being a platform for advertisement agencies, are also used to fuel in political interests. So if you pay attention to the highlighted phrases, you will see the signaling that is being done, right? In looking at, will attempt to investigate how, the first part of the paper will begin, and then the paper will move on to whatever it is. Okay. So again, everything has been clearly established right in the introductory paragraph. Then, after you have established your thesis statement, your main body may consist of three paragraphs, right? Which will have claims backed by evidence. You could also include a counter argument, and then your conclusion. Something like, while the increased commercialization of sports in today's consumer society is undeniable, certain attempts are being made to counter this. We have, for instance, right? So, again, an example. Now, pay attention. I have used, or the author has used, we have, for instance, not for example, right? So this sounds specific instead of being vague, and also right kind of academic. And if I go back to the previous slide where I have the thesis statement laid out, you will see commodification, right? So commodification of sport. So this is a discipline specific word that has been used here. And this commodification continues to dictate the rest of the thesis statement. Perhaps it might be a good idea if you were to write this paper to also give me a definition of commodification, of what you understand by commodification in this context. Okay. Okay. Now, using this framework that you have, I would like for you to use this framework for your own thesis statement. Okay, whatever is it that you're working on at this point, or whatever is it that you will eventually work on in the future, try to think about this through this framework. Okay, so map this example onto the claim, evidence, reasoning, so what framework, right? And if you do not have anything planned out yet, do not fret. We read the previous example. You can also use that example, okay, to further build onto this or to map onto this framework. But ideally, it would be a good point at this juncture to use your own research and see if you're able to map out what is the claim that you are making, what are the evidences that you are using, the reasoning that you are providing, and what is it that it has culminated into. Okay. So, where does the thesis statement do so what work? And where is it still just describing what the paper will do rather than what it will argue? Very, very important. What is it that you are describing? Are you just describing the problem, or are you making a case that this will argue this? Okay. So, again, extremely important to pay attention to your own thesis statement. And yeah, I mean, this is one way. And also, just to show you as an example, you will see that in this example, you will see we'll attempt to investigate. Okay. So it's more descriptive rather than putting forth a complete claim. Okay. So if you are working on this example only, what is one sentence that you would like to use to make this paper or to make this claim stronger? Again, I'll give you 5 minutes to think about this. And again, I don't want answers immediately. You may just want to jot this down as a self check for your own writing practice and see if your own thesis statement is able to answer all these questions. If you're able to map your thesis statement to this framework, claim, which leads to evidence, which leads to reasoning, which then leads to so what. Okay, so just 5 minutes. And again, if there is no project that you have immediately, you may just want to look back at this example. This paper, in looking at this rapid commodification of sport, will attempt to investigate how this sentence in particular and make or convert this into a claim. Or what is it that you would like to add to this paper so that there is a stronger sounding claim instead of it just being descriptive. Okay. Okay. Move on to the next bit. Maybe you just want to like jot it down and we'll circle back later. The other important bit that we have to pay attention to while we are writing academically or trying to make our papers sound academic is analytical voice and originality. I think the biggest fear that we all have is, are we original enough? Are we authentic enough? Uh, because I think there's no proper definition of originality in research. A lot of times people end up thinking that originality means that you come up with your own research idea, or it has to be like extremely path breaking or groundbreaking. So this is a very, very common freeze point, and I think that also stops a lot of us from writing also, because the voice in our head would just say, oh, isn't this just like repeating whatever has been already said? Isn't this just repeating whatever has been already written? So how do I make an original contribution? I think it is very, very important to understand that academic writing does not require inventing an idea from nothing, right? You have resources. So originality lies in putting others' ideas into new words and framing, and in how your piece adds to an existing conversation. So, I would like to think of originality in academia as an ongoing dialogue, right? Someone may have researched something previously, but now you're looking at it from a different perspective. So you get into a dialogue or you initiate a dialogue with that researcher and you continue building that dialogue. That is why it is very, very important. The only, I think, the caveat to originality is that you do not end up stealing somebody's ideas, right? And I think as researchers, we know what that entails. As ethical researchers, we know what that means. So of course, if I'm building onto someone's ideas or if I'm continuing a dialogue, I know where I have to give credit, right? So I just have to think of originality as an ongoing dialogue, as an ongoing conversation with researchers, with pieces that already exist from a different perspective or how they are unique to me. Say someone talked about, and I think this is very common in the food studies discourse also, with the rise of, say, like veganism in the West. How do you understand veganism within the Indian context when there are so many layers to it? Layers of caste, class, religion, politics, right? So you could look at an existing scholarship and bring that in conversation with your own positionality, right? So originality lies in putting others' ideas into new words and framing. That would be your framing, and in how your piece adds to an existing conversation, not in discovering something no one has ever said. Of course, you may then end up with something that no one has ever said, but that's exactly what your research is, the end product of your research. But you begin by pitching a dialogue, a conversation that leads you to something unique and authentic. Okay, so do not stress that originality has to be something that no one has ever said. Your work should be a conversation, a dialogue that would eventually lead you to this, right? But it's important that you initiate that conversation. So, this is how you defreeze and actually get to writing slash researching bit. Of course, these are the few ways through which you can initiate a conversation or initiate a dialogue, which is basically gap spotting. I think we love this. As researchers, we know that we have to spot a gap and see how that bridges the existing scholarship with our own. The other is problematizing. Sometimes it's very useful to problematize existing research if they haven't looked at it from a particular framework. Building on or extension. Again, you can stretch it further. Perhaps you may now want to look at why, say, the case of Coca-Cola, why it was banned for a very brief period of time, say in the 1990s, and now what banning or promoting it would look like in the current economy, right? So that would be an extension or a building on. Also, from an overview, descriptive, or summative, you could move on to a comparative study. You could also move on to an analytical study, or perhaps an investigative piece also. And then how do you think that your research is adding to the conversation? Through complications, through exploration, through questions that you may have, by also changing the focus or offering an alternative interpretation. So, all these are avenues through which you build onto your own research. Okay, again, very briefly put, the author talks about migration in the second chapter and gives some examples of displacement. Now, if you were to write this from, this is descriptive, right? It just tells you what this is doing. But now, if you were to write it analytically, right, how would you do it? And just to like give you this, very, very important. Again, these are the words that are descriptive in academic language. You may want to do away with these and actually write more actively by positioning yourself as a researcher by adopting analytical vocabulary, which is instead of saying shows, you could write reveals, exposes, or complicates. Instead of saying says, you could write argues, contends, or insists. Instead of saying talks about, it could be interrogates, unsettles, reframes. Instead of gives an example of, stages, enacts, dramatizes. Includes could be removed, and in place of that, you could have foregrounds, privileges, or sidelines. And then looks at could be complicates, explores, questions, offers an alternative, right? So now, if we were to go back, the author talks about migration. So, talks about, perhaps you could write the author interrogates the phenomenon of migration, or the author unsettles the phenomenon of migration, or reframes the phenomenon of migration in the second chapter, and gives some examples of displacement. So, gives some example could be and dramatizes, right? Or could be and explores or looks at through displacement, right? So, you know now if you were to restructure this sentence using this word bank by positioning yourself more actively, your A, you would be able to better position your own arguments instead of it just being a description. And B, it would sound academic, right? It won't be something that you're just stating. So, again, going back, it will tell me that this is either problematizing or that the piece is adding to the conversation by complicating or exploring or questioning, right? Or offering an alternative interpretation or being specific also, right? So, from an overview or description or a summation, ensure that your writing moves to a comparative, analytical, or an investigative tone. Okay. Now, the other important bit, and this is where I would like to stop, revision. Revision in terms of reverse outlining. So, say you have written everything that you wanted to write down. Of course, I couldn't have like a proper paper for an example, but this is an example for you. Revision checks whether the argument you intended is the one actually on the page. Sometimes we end up with a different argument and we end up writing something completely different. So, reverse outlining is the fastest way to find that gap. Now, below this is a paragraph that I have, and it actually includes a gap, which is basically a missing claim. So, again, read it and perhaps come up or perhaps identify where the claim is missing. Uh, I have given away the answer in a way that there is actually something that is missing. But yeah, now it is for you to figure out what is missing and from where. So I'll just read out the paragraph. The veranda occupies an odd status in the domestic architecture of colonial era homes, neither fully inside nor fully outside, neither private nor quite public. Household staff waited there, visitors were received there before being admitted further in. By the time the house itself has been mapped, the veranda has already done the sort of sorting who belongs where and on whose terms. Very simple. You just have to identify what's missing and where. So, how do you go about this? A cheat sheet for reverse outlining. Your step one is after the first read through, what is sentence one doing? Is it making a claim or setting a scene? What is sentence two adding that sentence one didn't already have? If I stopped reading right here, what would you assume the paragraph is arguing? Okay, so these are the questions that I would ask myself when I'm doing a reverse outlining. Now, step two, naming the gap. What kind of sentence is missing between here's what happens on the veranda and here's what that adds up to? Is there a difference between describing what the veranda is used for and arguing what that use means? And if sentence two is evidence, what claim is it evidence for? So remember the framework that I had given you. And if we were to work through that framework only, but through a reverse of that, we begin with so what, you will arrive at finding out what is missing in this particular paragraph. So, filling the gap, write one sentence that turns this evidence into an argument. What is the veranda actually doing, socially or politically, that the previous two sentences only show? So, of course, we have to add the sentence, the missing bit after the first two sentences. So, as a cheat sheet, what is your chosen topic? What is the specific focus? What is the methodology? How do you intend to organize your ideas? What are the future implications of your research inquiry? Okay, sorry. So before I actually come on to this, I'll put the answer. So if you've already come up with an answer, that's fine. But do understand that the bit missing is right after household staff waited there, visitors were received there before being admitted further in. Okay, so after that is where I would put in the missing claim. Now, your cheat sheet. Ensure that whenever you are writing for an academic outlet or whatever the output is, if it is an academic output, ensure that you have a chosen topic with a specific focus, with a particular methodology. Then ensure that you know how you intend to organize your ideas, whether they're going to be analytical, whether they're going to be descriptive, whatever it is, and what is the organization going to look like. And most important, what is the future implication of your research inquiry? If you're able to answer all these five things in your research paper or in your dissertation, you are good to go. And again, this is just like an example for transitional devices, where if you want to add on to something, these are the words. If you want to compare or contrast, these are the words to prove, again, to show exceptions, to show time, to give an example, to summarize or conclude. Again, I'm not reading these out. What I could perhaps probably do is share a cheat sheet with Vidushi, and she may forward it to the participants along with other resources that I feel would benefit all of you from this. So I have one on reverse outlining, how to go about doing the reverse outlining in a better way, and one on transitional devices. So I'll share these resources with Vidushi, and we can, I mean, she'll circulate it as and when. Okay, I am done, and now I look forward to your questions. I know there's more to academic writing, and I wish I could add more to it, but I honestly felt that these are the bits that, in my experience as a tutor, as a writing tutor, I have felt that this is where all of us struggle with. Because once we have the rhythm, it's not a problem really, but it's questions about originality, it's questions about what is academic sounding, or is this academic enough, that really derails us from the process of writing. So once we defreeze, I think then it's an easy way out. So I thought that I would focus on this in particular. And of course, if you have any questions related to the process of academic writing, feel free to ask. I'm here to answer those questions to the best of my knowledge. So yes, thank you so much for being so attentive and listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonakshi, for the session. So we would now like to take questions from the participants. You can either unmute and ask, or you can put it simply in the chat box. As I mentioned earlier, there is no worries in asking any questions. Feel free to ask any questions. So questions are welcome.
And I'll share the resources. So, Vidushi, I'll share them with you. And maybe you could just like circulate. I think I have two PDFs that might be useful. And I'll see if there are more, then I would like just forward them to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sonakshi. I mean, those are again, it was a brilliant session and also very practical advice. So I'll be very happy to circulate it. Meanwhile, before people are asking questions, I will just mention that I have put on the chat box um, resources that you had previously shared with us and which are uploaded on the website, which were on your previous sessions we had on writing a research paper or journal article. So feel free to peruse through those in your free time as and when you would like. So just have pinned them on the chat box so you can have a look. Yeah, over to everyone. Please go ahead and ask any questions you may have.
Also, one more thing. No question is stupid, so feel free to just like ask any query that you may have about academic writing. I know it gets very, very isolating when you are writing also. So please don't think that the question is stupid. And if you don't want to like ask out loud, you may just want to put it in the chat box, and I'll be more than happy to answer that as well.
Ma'am, good evening.
Good evening.
Ma'am, I'm Sunana. I did my PhD in 2022, and uh, I am into academic writing, and my papers have been published with Routledge London and the social scientists. So I did my PhD on Saharia. It's a PVTG tribe which resides on MP and Rajasthan border. So I am into publication thoroughly. I'm writing my fifth paper, which I'm writing for Routledge. Uh, when it comes to academic writing, as per se, I'm not facing any issue, ma'am. This is an out of box question because it's not about academic writing. I have a niche for academic writing. The first paper was the public distribution system of Saharias, which was published in Social Scientist. Then Sociology of Subalternism, I wrote on subalternism. That was again published in the Social Scientist, which is a South Asian journal. My very first paper, as you said, it took you 1.5 years to publish that paper. The same, I wrote that paper in 2020, and it took me 7 to 9 months to make out what it is really, whether it is descriptive or analytical. But I have been writing since 2020, and I have a knack of writing now. And today, your session has enriched it. Enhanced, actually speaking. The thing is that there is a personal issue which I'll be discussing it here. uh, uh, I am not able to join any university or any of the institute because my son is in professional golf, who is playing on national level, and he is staying at home. So he is going to school barely for 2 days. So it's like a self study for him. So because of him, I am not able to join any of the institutions. I worked as an RA in many social organizations and all, where I can work from home or there is no need of going daily. So ma'am, I just wanted to ask you if we can have a platform where you can, writing is fine, but academic writing, I'll keep on publishing, I know that, and they and my paper will be accepted also, because that I have written so much and I have published so much. But the thing is there any platform where you can write regularly, or wherein you can have any source of earning also? Academic writing, paper publishing is fine, ma'am. Academic writing is fine. You will be publishing in Springer or Taylor and Francis and all. I'm working for them also. But the thing is, where you can find a platform where you can write regularly, or it can work as a source of earning also. So that is my query, because I am totally grounded at home. I can't go out. That is my limitation, ma'am.
Okay, yeah, no, that I understand this, and I think one of the ways through which Again, there's no definite answer, or I can say that I know how to answer this, but from what I gathered, I also believe that when you say, that you are writing, and of course, publishing in scholastic, in like journals, they really don't pay. So, what I end up doing is that I end up pitching to non-academic platforms. So, whatever your research is, try to look at platforms that look for pitches that invite academics, scholars to pitch to them and also pay. So, as a matter of fact, what I do is that since I am also into food writing, I have a few outlets where I end up pitching myself to regularly. These pitches may be accepted, may not be accepted. But I've gotten published in one, the Loka War, which is at the intersection of, like, say, food and memory, food and society, also personal essays. So they welcome that. So, whatever your research interest is, because also it's niche, again, look for avenues that publish research, which is more public facing, right? Because that is what will get you money. Because again,
The
if it
thing
is
is, ma'am,
for scholars, yeah.
your background is different. I'm from sociology. I'm from sociology, and my thesis was based on anthropology. Basically, it was an anthropic study.
Yes, so why don't you look at platforms like doing sociology or something like that? Because I believe they do pay their contributors. This won't be sustainable in the long run, but at least that one article you write for them will end up getting you paid, right? So I honestly do not know of any avenue which would pay you in the long run or which would pay you consistently,
Leave
to
the
the
paying
best of
part
my
also.
knowledge. Right.
Leave the paying part also. If we can leave the paying part also, the only thing is, right now I feel that my entire academic journey has come to an halt, and this is going to be there till the time he crosses 12th, and that will be some age for him also and for me also. So the thing is, ma'am, where I can academically, wherein I am present, the only thing is I am alive, or I can survive myself academically for the next 3 4 years. That is my requirement. Basically, money is again not a requirement. If it comes, well and good, but where you can feel your presence is there and you are surviving in the academic world, if you get me right, ma'am.
Yeah, no, then I think I do not have anything in mind that comes to me like immediately. And if you feel like perhaps you could start something on your own, in the sense maybe you could gather 2 or 3 people from your cohort, like from your PhD, who were perhaps your junior, perhaps your cohort members as well, or your seniors, and get started with, like, say, a writing cafe or something where, I mean, it has worked in the past. I've been part of like such writing cafes where I've ended up meeting like-minded people, and for, say, a nominal charge of, like, say, a month, you just pay what, $200 or something to attend, like, say, 4 sessions over the weekend, 1 hour long, where you just
So,
interact
ma'am,
briefly.
there are the writing cafes which exist, like these sort of writing
Yes.
cafes.
Yeah.
Okay.
They
S-
used to. I don't have access to them anymore, but I'm pretty sure that if you look up the internet, or if you are active on Twitter or Blue Sky, because these are the go-to places, you might find some. I don't know of any that exist at the moment, but this is something that I'm talking about from the pandemic. Because I was writing my dissertation, like MPhil dissertation at that time, and it was very isolating. So I ended up joining this World Cafe writing together kind of an initiative for a brief bit, where we would just like meet for the first 10-15 minutes, talk a bit, figure out what each one of us is working around, and then just like zoom out, in the sense, switch off our cameras or whatever, do our own writing. And at the end, there would be an accountability kind of thing. There was also peer review that was happening within this group that we had like created, because all of us were like academics. So my suggestion would be, if you're unable to find one, create one. And this could be a very small group that you want to start with. But immediately to my mind, I cannot think of any such initiative at this point. In case I do,
I could,
I'll
I
pass it
just want
on. Yeah, yeah, Vidushi, yes.
No, I just thought that since we are on it, and I could refer to one or two spaces I know of. There is definitely Engender, which runs writing groups regularly. It's based in US, but the call goes out to researchers all over the world, and you can be part of their writing groups. So I can share
Okay,
the
ma'am.
link with you, and you could check that out. Also, if you're just looking at monetarily being in the publication circuit, you could also look at online magazines like FII, which does great work. And if you want to write for them, research based articles, and they would also pay you. So it's remunerative as well. And there are other certain online
Ma'am,
academic magazines,
what is the name of the magazine you told, ma'am?
FII. So that is Feminism in India, if I'm right with the it's an online
Okay,
portal,
okay,
so they have great works, and they pay you as well.
okay,
Or you
ma'am.
could look at again editing positions in magazines. So you're in or in like journals like EPW, which has editorial positions opening up, or several such. Like now we have so many. Like there are otherwise magazine, which is again like a semi-academic thing, or roadsides. There is a magazine. I know a lot of urban studies one because that's my area of this thing. But you could look at similar works in your this things doing sociology as Sonakshi suggested.
I'm not
So
doing
that
sociology, ma'am. I'm already on that platform, and I'm a regular
yeah,
this thing listener, and I'll ask. They ask for the papers also. Ma'am,
sure.
Rituparna ma'am is her studies are related to food again.
Yeah.
Is
So
the
I'll let you know about the engender thing one also, which somebody else also asked, like Payal, I think, has asked. So I'll share the link. They run the writing groups. Meanwhile, if we could take Niranjan's question, I think the hand was raised. Adit, we could just go ahead and sorry, since I noticed that's why.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. My question was, ma'am, can you suggest a few academic books to learn academic writing? Like,
Yes, I think again I'll pass on those resources and Vidushi can just pass them on. I have a few names. One is definitely Stephen Bailey, because that's my go-to for teaching academic writing also, and it's a very good start for starters, especially go-to guide for starters. So I'll just put in the names of a few guides and pass it on, so you'll have access to those also.
thank you, ma'am.
Hello.
Yes,
Yes.
hi.
Hi, Sonakshi. So where I am right now is a very weird point in my life because I did my master's, then took a turn completely and went into NGOs and started working there, which was very like practice oriented and like solution oriented. Like every problem needs to have a solution. We cannot not have a solution, right? And now I'm like literally done and exhausted with that kind of mentality honestly. So I'm thinking of getting back into my academic like personality and start doing I'm thinking of a PhD right now. And what is happening to me is, first thing, I am struggling a lot with, the kind of rigor we need for reading or writing academically, because 2 years was a complete derail from that mentality. And also, this is leading me to another problem where I am not able to figure if my claim, or whenever I start writing, is that some pre-constructed bias which is coming into the picture where I'm still not able to locate the assumptions that I'm making, or if it is like a neutral claim making. I mean, like where is my bias exactly? I'm not able to in some sense locate it, because the PhD what I'm trying to pitch, I have been in the field, I've lived there for almost a year. And so I became friends, and it was like a very family-ish sort of a thing. So like is maybe that could be creating a bias, or like, as you said, you gave multiple cheat sheets. So is there any way of understanding where we are being like not neutral? I think neutral is a wrong term, but where our bias is not exactly coming, and where is it like scholarly sort of a thing? Like how do we locate that?
Okay, this is a very, very tricky question because, in all honesty, this is something that I struggle with. In the sense because I was trained in literature. So for me, everything is just like close reading. And, there's hardly anything that I have dealt with by being on the field. Of course, there are a host of articles that would tell you that this is how you account for your positionality. This is how you account for your, like, by putting out a statement that this is where you come from, and this is what happened, or this is what shaped or colored your observations. But also, before I go there, Vidushi, would you like to hop in and actually answer this since you were active and you are active on the field?
Sure. Actually, the thing is, somebody was asking a question, and I think I missed Sharyu's question, a part of it, because I was responding to the chat box resources question. So, if Sharyu could just quickly repeat the question, or like in very summary way, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I was saying that because of my, like, a little bit prolonged field immersion, where I'm also wanting to do a PhD about, I am not able to locate exactly where my bias is coming into the picture and where I need to, like, zoom a little back or get a step back and understand where my, like, what am I really assuming, or where are my assumptions and biases, and kind of make it objective or neutral. Like, is there any way of understanding or locating that thing?
Um, uh, Again, like this is because I was in field work, and I will be back in the field, and I'm doing a project which is about immersing once. But my project also is on home geographies. So something that I can share from my personal experience is that uh, I don't think that bias is a problem per se, because I come from the lineage of feminist studies where I think that there's always a position from which you're looking at things, and that cannot be sidelined. So one, that is the thing. But then again, it's important to understand what is it that is your lens of looking. So for example, I am studying something which is very much related to home spaces. So I thought that this is going to be an easy project because I'm looking at architectural spaces of other people's homes coming from a particular community, and then understanding them and making a certain analysis of it. But over a period of time, what has happened is that when I was in field, I was realizing that my ways of reflecting on those spaces while I was talking to people, the kind of questions I was asking was informed by my own experiences of living within a home. And then, as each time I went for an interview or a conversation, when I came back, those reflections were carried forth in my own homes. I became more critical of the spaces that I was occupying, and it led to a lot of altercations back at home. So it's like there is no slicing up, and every day spent on the field will open up your lens of how you are looking at it. So as to say that it's not an ever ending process. Each day is a realization of what is your lens, how you are interacting with the field. And I think a good way of understanding it is that um, if you have field notes, and if after every visit or after every day, even if you're not visiting in the field but you're just living your life, but you have to be very acutely aware of your own self, of your own actions, of your own surroundings, and record those acute awareness, like maybe like a voice note. I do a lot of voice note recordings for my help. So like constantly recording it and then hearing it at a point and seeing that how you have changed and how your ways of looking at a particular thing has changed over a period of time, and that's where your subjectivity belongs, that's where your lens of looking at things belong. uh, just give very like, because I cannot tell in detail what my research is about, but I will tell you so that being in the field, I realized we always are constantly unlearning, I agree, but I unlearned something very basic about my life, something as basic as the ways in which I touched things. That is something that I realized through my fieldwork. So I realized how much my lens was colored by my own life as belonging to a particular community, living a life in a particular home, in a particular way, with a particular family. And that was very much imbibed very sensorially in my bodies itself. So it can come after a long time. So it really requires constantly just reflecting on our actions. And I'm still constantly thinking about it. There'll be no end point. You'll always be looking. But I think one thing is like having field notes constantly written, recorded, painted, diagramized, visualized, whatever ways. Very random thoughts also. If you keep recording them, I think they will make you more and more aware of how you are thinking. And also, one thing again helps is speaking to other people about it, because I think especially people who are different than you, who do not know about your project, or who also come from different backgrounds, because when you do speak to them, you realize their worlds are so different of looking at the same experience. If somehow you happen to have a team going through the same experience, that also is very helpful, because everybody in that team is looking at that same experience in very different ways, and it makes you very aware of your own positions. But also, if you're just by yourself, then speaking to your peers about this experience you have had, we will realize how the same experience is just being read so differently by different people. And that tells us that we have had different life experiences, and that informs how we're looking at it, making us more aware of where we stand. I don't know if that makes sense, but this is all I can suggest at this point. Yeah.
Thank you, Vidushi. I think that was pretty exhaustive, and that is exactly what I would have also like positioned. And also, I've just put in a link which I feel might be a good way to understand positionality and inclusive reflection practice. I don't know if this is still open access or not, but if not, I'll anyway send the link and the document. And again, as Vidushi said, I think having a reflection log also helps. Of course, where you also note down your own position, and by the end of each day or by the end of like whatever it is, just put down what that particular interaction made you feel. How would you assess yourself? So there's also a before and after. And of course, whenever this gets published or whatever, you are, I think it is a requirement where you also disclose your own position, right? Or you have a position statement of that sort. So again, all these are ways through which you can be more ethical and also take care of your biases, because as Vidushi said, we all come with our own loads, right? There are biases that we also cannot sideline. But if we are just cognizant of those and work with those while we are on the field, I think that is a bigger matter to consider. And of course, I would also say read challenging literature, in the sense that perhaps there is something that you do not agree with. Try to challenge yourself to get around to the other perspective, because if you expose yourself to only things that kind of agree with you or what you believe is right, you will not be able to respect difference that way. And that will also be a bit of a friction when you also find yourself on the field, because you may intuitively just hunt for something that kind of conforms to what you already have in mind. So I think exposing yourself to literature of that kind pretty early on is kind of like a good practice as well. So that you are open to the perspective and the worldview of different ideas that might come together or originate from that one single instance that you have in mind as well. So I hope this also answers your question.
Yeah, pretty much. Thank you. That was awesome, actually, from both of you. And another follow-up question is how, like, do you know of any platforms or any groups which are open, to this writing exercises, as you said, or, where we could, because finding peers is kind of difficult. Like, there are so many, other structural differences that, yeah, obstructs us from having these constructive peers. So if you know of any peer groups, or where and how exactly can we be a part of it, where we are actively writing or discussing ideas, then that would also be very, very helpful.
Right. So again, as I said, I think Vidushi has put in a few or a link for one or two. What I would also suggest is, and I have benefited greatly from it, try to have a Twitter or a Blue Sky account at this point. And I know X is like, I mean, Twitter is not the place to be really with so much of like elonification of that platform. But honestly, if you are able to find yourself in an academic space, especially the academic part of Twitter, stick to it. You may end up meeting like-minded people. I mean, I benefited greatly of social media, especially Twitter, during the pandemic, because that's exactly how I found like-minded scholars. uh, both national and international. You will also be in the loop about the right kind of opportunities, grants, or fellowships. So I would say that also diversify. Instead of also just looking at, like, say, writing groups, try to also make these kind of networks and connections. LinkedIn, I don't know much about whether there is an academic LinkedIn as well, but Twitter and Blue Sky pretty much are really, really active with like the academic side is pretty much active. And there are writing spaces, of course. So if you are, I mean, in Delhi or in and around Delhi, there are also like a lot of writing spaces that have come up. Again, information, something that I only get off the internet, like say Twitter or something. So maybe, these are the places to be at this point, or following these magazines or journals which have a large following, which end up kind of doing these kind of online writing cafes or something of the sort. Reach out to your seniors or people from your your batch who are still pursuing or who are still in academia. See if there are PhD scholars. Sometimes PhD scholars have informal writing groups as well, and see if you might get a chance to be a part of it. uh, Try to volunteer to review also, because that inadvertently ends you getting into like a writing group, or breaking into a circle. So maybe put yourself out there more, especially if you want to get started in your academic journey also. And this is applicable for everyone at whatever stage you are at as a scholar. I think putting yourself out there is very, very important, because I think at this point, visibility rewards work. So you really, really have to. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a very long answer. I've just like meandered. But yeah, the point, what I'm trying to say is, be more out there. Try to get yourself a Twitter account or a Blue Sky account, and connect with like-minded people there, scholars that you've looked up, whatever, and you may end up like in a similar space that way. And Vidhushi has shared some links in the chat box, I think. So you could also like just check those. Yeah.
There's also a question by Navya. It was long back. Just letting you know. It is Adit. Would you want to read the question if it's on your screen, or I could read it?
Yeah, I would read it. So the question goes on like, can we start an article with an anecdote, like a personal experience of a sample, to establish the premise of the topic, specifically if it's an ethnographic study?
Okay. Now this is something that I feel a bit contested about. Honestly, this is, I mean, if I'm writing an academic journal, article, I mean, like if I'm writing for an academic journal, I might not want to actually start with a personal anecdote. That could just be, and like that could be weaved in later after I have made my observations. But so I would like to stay clear from putting myself out there unless and until it's uh, I mean, I feel a bit contested about this only because if, as an upper caste woman, also, if I'm looking at a phenomenon which differs widely from my experience, so I think this has to do with the positionality. I think, again, it comes down to the question of position. Um, I think I wouldn't do this. If I have to say, talk about caste bias, perhaps. That would be a reflection that can come in later, where I have found myself, unconsciously following this caste biasness in my everyday. But to put it out in the beginning is something that I wouldn't do. Again, this is a very simple example because ethnographic study is again very complicated. And again, I would rely on Vidushi to like guide us whether this is like a more appropriate way or not. But as a thumb of the rule, I wouldn't start with a personal anecdote. I really wouldn't. I would think of this more as like, okay, I have my evidence, whatever it is. And this is again something stemming from my own practice, also my own habit, also. So this is additional not evidence, but additional proof of something that I have been talking about. but not something that I would rely on primarily. So this is how I would like look at it. But Vidushi, if you have a similar stance or different, maybe you want to like just pitch in about this.
No, I think I would agree on the positionality part. I think it depends on where you're writing, which journal you're publishing in, what voices. There are certain journals which do not particularly the writing from the eye perspective is not very much appreciated. So then you would not want to steer clear of that. But I know in ethnographic writing, it is something that could be valued, especially if one is writing in positionality with feminist works. It could be valued, but beginning from that point, again, very rightly, Sonakshi, as you mentioned, depending on what you're writing about, how you relate it to that topic, um, it will, and what is the experience that you're bringing in. If that ethnographic, that will determine as to would you want to start it with your own personal anecdote or not. And I think, like, if it's a piece on ethical conversations in the field, then it makes complete sense to begin it from a personal reflection point of view, because those are conversations you're having with yourself. If it's a piece which is about a particular group that you're doing, and it's an other group, like this, you're studying a community other than you, and you are making, then maybe centering your voice might not be the best approach, because you are trying to. So I think she's very rightly put it. I would also encourage the same thing, that where you're writing, what you're writing, how will determine how you write it. And also, yeah, and also to say that now, because I'm here, I just know that there are friends who write such different forms of writing. There are also, like, in ethnographic works which have poetry in it, which is very, very personal. So I also would not like to box anything in anything. It really depends on what forms you're exploring and how it speaks to your
Yeah,
politics. That's it. Yeah.
absolutely. And platform. Sometimes if it is like, say, a very public facing platform, then you may want to actually begin with the I voice. But again, I would say rule of the thumb, just check where you are coming from, right? So I think that would actually be a good indicator whether you want to like position yourself out there and like be there at the onset, or is it like more of an observation and you don't want to like take away from the voice or the crux of what is it that you're actually talking about. So yeah, this is what I would say.
Uh, Aditya, I think there are no more questions. We could, if there are more questions, people can put it in or raise their hands. But if there are no more questions, we could then close the session, Adit.
Yeah, I think there's no much questions. There's nothing that had come up in the comment section. So once again, before wrapping up, thank you, Sonakshi, for the session, for your valuable insights. It was really great for conceptualizing the practices in academic writing. So thank you for all the participants also for your engagements. And now, yeah, I think we could end the session.